So, let me tell you a little bit about our topic, feeling more aligned with your partner. This is something which really isn't discussed very often, but is so essential. The difference between feeling really aligned with your partner versus just kind of coexisting. In fact, it makes me think of children, right? When babies are one, they just play on their own. And then when they're about 2 years old, they engage in parallel play. What does parallel play mean? It means this 2-year-old is playing over here and this 2-year-old is playing over here, but they're playing with different toys. They're not interacting directly with one another. They're aware they're in the same room, but they're doing what's called parallel play. And then at age 3, it's developmentally normal for children to engage with one another. So when it comes to relationships, I suppose we all can imagine what the 1-year-old version is like. That's being single before you're in the relationship. And interestingly, it doesn't go quite in the same order as it does with children, where with children there's individual play, then parallel play, and then playing together. What happens far more often in relationships is first the people are single, then they get together, do things together, speak together, ask questions, have a lot of interest in one another's lives, aim to be honest and vulnerable. And then somewhere along the way, there's a regression into parallel play, where the two of you are in a marriage together, you wake up in the same home, but what about feeling truly supported, feeling truly seen, really collaborating and knowing that whatever you share with your spouse, you're going to be supported, and if it's not quite right, you can ask for an adjustment so that it will be supportive. This kind of alignment really is the prerequisite to ongoing heat and passion in the relationship. And it's sometimes easier to focus, not easy, just easier to focus on heat and passion and sexual intimacy and erotic energy, because it's more clear when that's present and when that's absent, when that's waning, when that's rising, when that's intense and incredible, and when it just sort of slips through your fingers and you don't know how to get it back. It's much easier to know genuinely what your status is when it comes to passion in marriage. Even if the two of you don't have the same opinion, you know what your experience is. But when it comes to alignment and being on the same page, knowing how to support your spouse and have them feel supported, and how to feel supported by your spouse, that is very tricky territory. And we don't have a lot of language to talk about that landscape. And we don't have a lot of modeling or internal reference points. So I really want to begin the conversation of both what it means to be aligned with your spouse and how to create more alignment. If you were to rate it 0 to 10, where's the alignment in your relationship? Would you put it at a 10, totally magnificent alignment? At a 0, because the two of you don't really talk to one another? Or maybe use an adjective. I want to know, what are your thoughts about alignment in your own relationship? Now, when it comes to alignment, let me start with a definition. I didn't look it up in the dictionary, so what I'm going to tell you is really from my heart. Alignment is a kind of awareness, attunement, both a self-acceptance and an acceptance of your spouse in such a way that you feel independent and interdependent while knowing for sure you're breathing the same air. So for me, one of the ways alignment expresses is when I wake up in the morning. Usually my husband gets up before I do, but when I see him and our eyes meet for the first time in the morning, that is one of the ways that I feel alignment. And I didn't say it, but you could see me just exhale and breathe more deeply. I think when there isn't anything complicated to navigate, there isn't anything dramatic, really one of the ways that I feel the alignment is that look we have in one another's eyes, or sometimes he'll touch me or I'll touch him. This morning, I'm not going to turn around, but he just ran his finger down my back. And it's like a pulse of alignment that we share. And it's subtle, but when it's missing, I definitely feel the difference. Let me share a little bit about how we got to this. I think one of the most significant moments for me was when we were in the midst of a very intense argument. I actually don't remember what it was about, so it can't have been that important, but it felt very important in the moment. We were in this intense argument, and I don't know what I was saying, but I'm sure I had, the proverbial steam coming out of my ears. I was just in such a state and felt so at odds with my husband. And partway through our whole thing, he just stopped, looked at me and said, "Alexandra, we're on the same team." And in that moment, I realized, mostly what I realized is that I had no idea what he was talking about. I could hear the words, but they weren't real for me. They weren't true for me. And yet there was a part of my mind that knew they were true. And that opened a whole door for me, because I realized that even though I wanted, in a way more than anything else, to be on the same team with my husband, that from the inside out, I was internally approaching this argument, as though we were adversaries. And if you approach anything in an adversarial manner, you create the results of being adversaries. And so I became aware that whenever I was in an intense disagreement, I stepped away from alignment and collaboration and being on the same team, and was interacting from the we're not on the same team mode. And so what I learned to do is step back into the we're on the same team mode. So if that's something that you want to do, I'd like to give you a few ways of doing so. First of all, don't just do this when you're in an argument. If you want to build your skills and expand your way of being and access more yummy, simple alignment with your spouse, if you're really serious about it, that is a daily practice that is completely unrelated to whether you're having arguments, peacefulness, disconnection, great sex, no sex. None of those things influence leaning in to create more alignment. Those things will definitely shift and benefit from more alignment, but creating more alignment truly starts on the inside. If that's something you want, here's a way to do that. Every day, you can pause for a moment and just feel what it feels like when the two of you are connected. And when you close your eyes and you bring up that feeling, nothing in your circumstances will have changed. Your spouse won't have done anything differently. You won't have had a discussion or an argument or not had one. It's entirely within your purview. You are a sovereign being, and you can choose to have that feeling. And when you have that feeling of being on the same team, of being aligned, and really I'm closing my eyes to do it while I speak to you. Really feel it, like not just as an idea, let it permeate all the way through your torso and down to your toes, this feeling of alignment, being supportive, knowing how to support, collaborating, dancing to the same music. And when you evoke that feeling in the privacy of your own body, mind, heart, and soul, it will become one of the ways that you have access to when you actually interact with your spouse. You can have that feeling and then bring it to the interactions rather than looking for the interactions to evoke that feeling in you. The more you bring the feeling to the interactions, the more those interactions are going to reflect alignment. So this is true whether you're making lunches for your children to take to school. This is true whether you're brushing your teeth. This is true whether you're having sex. This is true whether you're paying bills. The point is that if every day, I don't mean while you're doing those things, but if every day you set aside some time to really focus on the feeling of being aligned with your partner, of having a supportive vibe and collaboration between the two of you. If you do that every day in your own time, in a private way, it will start to permeate other moments. And for me, when this came up, during this argument, I felt alignment with my husband a lot of the time, but not all the time, and never in conflict. Never when I was hot and really into my own way of doing things. But the more that I learned to access this feeling on the inside, the more it was available in all of our interactions. And let me say, it's not actually as easy as I've just made it out to be, where you close your eyes and then you can evoke a sense of alignment. Not at all. Actually, you can close your eyes and evoke a sense of alignment and notice, where are the tensions in your body? What are the thoughts that arise? In other words, when you do that, it shows you where your blocks are, where your hurdles are, what are the things that are in the way. And so maybe when you go to evoke that sense of feeling, that feeling of alignment, you feel tense in your belly, like you can't take a deep breath and you can't relax. Well, then maybe it's time to just see what the cause of that tension is and give attention to that, and then try again to evoke the feeling of alignment. Or maybe when you're trying to evoke that feeling, you have in your mind how angry you are that 5 years ago he totaled your car when he shouldn't have even been driving it. I mean, it could be major, or it could be that he or she didn't want to have sex with you last week. Like, whatever it is that comes to mind is a kind of hurdle on the way to that feeling of alignment. So if you can just access that feeling of alignment, go for it. But if you can't, because you have various feelings or ideas that just keep coming up and getting in the way, well, that is a way of knowing what you need to work through in order to feel more aligned. And when you feel more aligned, more attuned, more connected, more sovereign, I'm not talking about anything remotely like codependence. I'm talking about really being sovereign and who you are, and feeling this beautiful relational depth and expansion. The more that you interact from there, from your powerful, sovereign, open-hearted alignment, the more irresistible and just plain safe it is for your spouse to open and connect with you as well. So that is referring to attachment theory, which is if you Google it, there's a lot of information, books, YouTube articles about attachment theory, with the basic idea that when we are babies, very rarely are babies able to develop secure attachment fully. I mean, certainly to some degree, but secure attachment where they know from their caregivers, typically mother and father, that their needs will be met. And a child who has the experience as a newborn baby and beyond that their needs will be met, then moves through the world with the understanding and the identity that they will know what their needs are and they will be met. But as I presume everybody on this call knows, parents are not gods and goddesses. We don't have ESP, or we can't perfectly attune to 100% align to our baby's needs. So sometimes we don't change the diaper right away. Sometimes they're crying and we don't know what the cause is. Sometimes, all kinds of things happen. And as a result, for babies who grow up into adults without secure attachment, they develop either avoidant attachment or anxious attachment. And avoidant attachment, which is presumably what one of the people in this couple exhibits, is whenever there's any kind of stress, conflict, anything complicated, anything where things are not just easy and loving and calm and just no stress. When there's any kind of other flavor, stress, conflict, disagreement, loneliness, rejection, awkwardness, anything that naturally comes up in any relationship, the person with avoidant attachment is going to be inclined to leave, to avoid, to just, the avoidant attachment person wants to avoid the discomfort that is present. Whereas the person with anxious attachment becomes anxious if they're not close and confirming that everything's okay and that the other person loves them. And I sometimes, I don't think that I have anxious attachment disorder, but I personally incline towards anxious attachment much more than avoidant attachment. So if I'm stressed out and let's say my husband and I are lying in bed and we're hugging, he always laughs because his tendency is more towards avoidant attachment, but we'll be embracing and I want to be closer. I want to be closer. It's like we're already touching, but I want the comfort of being much, much closer. That is my tendency towards anxious attachment that is coming up. So for example, if your spouse comes home later than you expect, someone with anxious attachment is going to become anxious. Someone with avoidant attachment is more likely to be like, well, it's okay. So there's a lot more to say about that. It's very interesting to learn about this, but that was all context to be able to answer this question. How would you help a couple in which one is avoidant and the other anxious attachment? So the first thing is to clarify that both of them want more connection. Because if both of them want more connection, then there are ways for the avoidant person to turn towards the relationship and towards the other person. And there are ways for the anxious attachment person to allow more spaciousness, more breathing room, more interdependence rather than codependence. Now, if I ask someone with anxious attachment, do you want more connection? They're invariably going to say yes. But the person with avoidant attachment may or may not say yes, they want more connection because their coping mechanism is to avoid things. But with the question, how would I help a couple? My first question is, do you both want more connection? And I would want to emphasize to the person with avoidant attachment that I'm talking about connection that feels good to you, that isn't suffocating, that has enough spaciousness that you get to be who you are and have more connection. So as long as that is the case, the main way that I start with someone with anxious attachment and avoidant attachment is actually similar to what I talked about earlier about paying attention to how it feels on the inside. So for the person with anxious attachment, when you're feeling like you want more attention, you want more closeness, you want to be closer physically, the way I was describing, I sometimes feel, to instead just pay attention to how you feel. You might get in the habit of just writing down, I feel anxious, I feel lonely, I feel nervous. Just breathing and paying attention to how you feel gives you some more objectivity and cultivates sovereignty, because the kind of curse of anxious attachment is that you give your partner the power for you to feel calm. And that is not a well-placed power or responsibility. You need to learn to create your own safety so that you can then engage with your partner from wholeness rather than looking for your partner to fill that sense of need. Because there's nothing your partner can actually do that's going to resolve and heal that need. That is something you need to do. And for the avoidant person, the most important thing is to get in the habit of identifying their own needs and considering a variety of ways of getting them met. So sure, sometimes there's the default method of just separating, shutting down, going into a different room, tuning out. That's the familiar, but it's an unconscious default. So to just begin to have a few options, a menu to choose from, it creates more sovereignty, spaciousness, and availability for connection. So another possibility in that moment, other than shutting down, might be to say, I'm uncomfortable discussing this. For someone who's an avoidant attachment style, that's a big deal. And then it's super important that the anxious attachment person just appreciates that they've identified their own needs. Because to put it simply, the avoidant person tends to just ignore their needs and just disconnect, and the anxious person can become obsessed with their needs and want the other partner to meet them. Both of those are barriers to luscious, open-hearted, gratifying connection. But what I'm wanting to convey is that in the case of overcoming the disconnection resulting from avoidant and anxious attachment, the work begins with up-leveling and taking responsibility for your own relationship to your own needs.